The room where the conference was held was too bright for the heaviness that settled inside it. White lights reflected off polished tables, glass walls, and the quiet faces of journalists who had learned how to sit still in the presence of storms. Outside, cameras crowded the entrance, hungry for movement, for conflict, for something to turn into a headline. Inside, the air was tense in a way that could not be measured by temperature. Everyone sensed that something fragile was about to be handled in a careless way. When the doors opened, the representatives entered first, their footsteps sharp against the floor. Behind them followed V, known to the world as Taehyung. His face was calm, but calm had long ago stopped meaning comfort. Calm was a practiced expression, one learned through years of standing beneath bright lights while feeling unseen in the ways that mattered. He did not know yet what would be revealed, only that he had been summoned into a conflict that was never meant to be his. Across the room, lawyers whispered to one another, papers sliding across the table like quiet warnings. The name Min Hee-jin was repeated in low voices, as if speaking it aloud too clearly might make the room crack. The dispute with HYBE had already consumed weeks of headlines, reshaping public opinion with every statement and counterstatement. What had once been a corporate disagreement had become a public spectacle, where truth and strategy blurred into something difficult to separate. Taehyung took his seat without ceremony. The chair was too stiff, the table too wide. He folded his hands together, feeling the faint pressure of his own pulse against his fingers. He thought about the message he had sent months ago, a message written in a moment of casual warmth, the kind of brief conversation that people send every day without imagining that it could one day be framed, enlarged, and dissected by strangers. He had not imagined that words typed in a private space could be carried into a public courtroom like a weapon. The conference began with formalities, voices measured and polite. Statements were read, claims were summarized, accusations laid out in careful language that softened their sharpness. The journalists leaned forward, pens ready, phones lifted, eyes trained on every twitch of expression. In the space between sentences, silence pressed down like a held breath. It was in that silence that the first mention of the messages appeared, casual and devastating at the same time. A representative from Min Hee-jin's side cleared his throat and announced that evidence would be presented. The word evidence echoed strangely in the room, heavy with authority. Taehyung did not move at first. He did not yet understand what that evidence would be, only that the room's attention shifted toward him in a way that felt invasive, like hands reaching through invisible walls. When the contents of the private conversation were revealed, the room changed. The tone of the conference shifted from legal to intimate, from corporate to personal. Words that had once existed between two people were now projected onto screens and read aloud by voices that did not belong to the one who had written them. Taehyung felt the distance between himself and his own words, as though they had been taken from him and given new meanings without his consent. He did not raise his voice. He did not stand. The weight of what was happening settled into his chest in a slow, quiet way. The violation was not loud. It did not arrive with chaos. It arrived with calm professionalism, wrapped in legal language that made intrusion feel legitimate. He realized then how fragile privacy truly was when power decided it could be moved. The journalists reacted quickly. Some exchanged glances, sensing the drama of the moment. Others typed rapidly, transforming personal fragments into potential headlines. Outside the glass walls, cameras adjusted angles, searching for the smallest change in Taehyung's expression. The world was eager to see how he would react to the loss of something that had never been meant for public eyes. The words from the chat were ordinary. They did not reveal scandal or betrayal. They were fragments of conversation, light in tone, human in their simplicity. That was what made their exposure so unsettling. It was not that the content was explosive. It was that it had been taken. Privacy, once broken, did not need dramatic material to cause damage. The act of breaking it was enough. Taehyung felt a strange mixture of disbelief and clarity. He understood, in that moment, how easily people could be pulled into conflicts they did not choose. He was not part of the legal dispute. He was not aligned with either side. Yet here he was, his personal words positioned as proof in a battle of power. The room did not ask him whether his words could be used. The room had decided that it could. Min Hee-jin's legal team spoke about context, about intention, about relevance. Their language was precise, carefully chosen to frame the messages as supporting evidence. Yet no amount of explanation could erase the simple truth that the messages had been private. Taehyung listened without interrupting, his expression composed, though inside him something tightened. He was being spoken about while being present, as if his presence did not grant him ownership over his own words. The conference continued, but time felt distorted. Each minute stretched, heavy with implication. Taehyung thought about how many private moments people trusted to the safety of their phones, how many quiet conversations existed in digital spaces that felt intimate yet fragile. He wondered how many of those moments could be pulled into public view by forces larger than the people who created them. When the conference ended, the room released its tension all at once. Chairs scraped against the floor, voices overlapped, the quiet professionalism dissolving into the noise of movement. Journalists rushed toward the exits, already shaping the story in their minds. Taehyung stood slowly, feeling the weight of being observed from every direction. The light that had seemed too bright now felt almost blinding. Outside, flashes of cameras burst like sudden storms. Questions were shouted, some sharp, some careless, all demanding immediate clarity from a situation that was anything but clear. Taehyung did not answer. He moved forward with a controlled pace, surrounded by staff who formed a barrier between him and the crowd. Silence, in that moment, was the only form of dignity he could claim. Later, in the quiet of a private room, the noise of the world faded into a distant echo. The space was small, dimly lit, and finally free from cameras. Taehyung sat down, the stiffness in his shoulders releasing slightly. The weight of the day pressed on him, not as exhaustion, but as a realization. Privacy was not simply about secrecy. It was about consent, about the right to choose where one's words belonged. He thought about Min Hee-jin, about HYBE, about the conflict that had grown larger than the people inside it. Legal disputes had a way of swallowing unintended lives, pulling them into narratives that were never theirs. He did not doubt that each side believed in its own righteousness. But righteousness, he understood, did not protect the quiet spaces where human conversations lived. That night, as statements circulated online and interpretations multiplied, Taehyung chose his response carefully. He did not accuse. He did not inflame. He spoke about discomfort, about surprise, about the simple truth that the messages had been shared without his permission. His words were calm, but beneath them was a firm boundary, one drawn not with anger, but with clarity. The public reaction was immediate. Fans expressed outrage at the invasion of privacy. Others debated legality and ethics, arguing about whether private conversations could become public tools in legal conflicts. The internet, as it often did, turned a complex situation into a battlefield of opinions. Yet beneath the noise, a quieter conversation emerged about the limits of power and the vulnerability of personal communication in a world where everything could be archived and retrieved. Days passed, but the echo of the conference lingered. Taehyung returned to his work, to rehearsals, to the rhythms of a life that demanded continuity even when the inside felt unsettled. The incident did not define him, but it marked him with a deeper awareness of how easily boundaries could be crossed when convenience and strategy outweighed respect. In the broader narrative of the dispute, his involvement became a footnote, a moment of controversy that faded as new developments took center stage. Yet for him, the experience reshaped his understanding of trust. Conversations, he realized, were not just exchanges of words. They were acts of vulnerability, offered in the belief that they would remain where they were placed. The conference room returned to being just a room, empty of tension, silent again. The screens were turned off, the chairs pushed back into place. But the moment that unfolded there did not disappear with the clearing of the space. It lived on in articles, in memory, in the quiet reflections of those who had witnessed how easily a private voice could be carried into a public arena. In the end, there was no dramatic resolution, no single moment of justice that restored what had been taken. There was only a subtle shift in awareness, a reminder that even in worlds built on visibility, some things deserve to remain unseen. And in that reminder, Taehyung found a quiet resolve, not to close himself off from human connection, but to hold it with greater care, knowing how fragile it could be when power decided that privacy was negotiable.